Yeah, and also I would, this is a big topic, so there are lots of things to talk about it. And at any point during this talk, I want to make a caveat very clear. I am not a mental health professional. I'm not a teaching psychology, or I have done psychology. I'm an expert, but I'm not involved directly in mental health. I'm not a psychiatrist. So I'm somebody who is a climate researcher, and I also work with sociology, and I'm a philosopher. So I'm a philosophy of mind person. So we do a lot of work on philosophy of mind, which is related to psychology. And being a counselor for students and talking with people during, like informal counseling. And I've done a lot of cognitive therapy myself, cognitive therapy, behavior therapy, yoga therapy. So these kind of things give me a sort of a field in the edge, like, on ground experience of philosophy and psychology. But at the same time, I want to also say that what I'm saying today is coming from a point of view of climate change, particularly, right? So sometimes I will really use these psychology terms of disorders and mental problems. They are supposed to be very, very, they're not the technical definitions. I'm going to give a layman's view of it. So if you are looking forward to a very technical session, I suggest that you note down those points and go and talk to a real mental health professional, a doctor or a psychiatrist about these things in detail, okay? So don't use what I'm saying as a way to diagnose your friend, okay? So that's what I mean. It's very common that even when we were doing masters in psychology, we took the DSM manual, which actually is all the mental disorders, and we started saying, oh, you have grandiose illusion, you have PSTDC, you have depression. So it's not a thing to be lightly used. You have to go to a mental health professional. So having said that, that's like a disclaimer. Let me go on to say something interesting about today's topic, okay? So let me begin with the idea of climate change itself. So, climate change itself, the topic itself is becomes a mental problem for people. Why? I'll tell you. That's because thinking about climate change is overwhelming. I've been an activist and environmental activist in my younger days, and now I'm more of a pen and paper activist. But it's an overwhelming thing to think of this huge thing called climate change. And there's a reason why that is happening. That's happening because it's you kind of are hearing these doomsday reports, what we call doomsday reports, right? There are people saying that huge number of islands will dissolve underwater. There will be like all the polar bears are going to die. There'll be untimely rains. There will be like these disastrous events which will happen. The temperatures will go up. We know global warming is a reality now. So on one side, you can always get into the scientific data of it and say, oh, it's only gone up by 4 degrees, 0.4004 degrees every year or whatever. And then, convince yourself, it's okay. It's only a few more months. It's like this COVID thing, right? You have 4.1 and then you'll have COVID 5.0 and then you'll have COVID 6.0. So it's like given that it's incremental, it doesn't overwhelm you. But when you think of the whole thing, like 2 years, it's going to overwhelm you. So if 2 years is going to overwhelm you, imagine what will happen if you think of climate change, where it's a planetary upheaval. The entire Earth is going to be changing. And then there's like upscaled amount of immigration, migration, climate refugees coming in from one nation to another. There's going to be extreme events of climates. People are going to lose their water. Some people are going to lose some people are going to have a better climate. Deserts may get rain, then places which get rain may not have deserts. Animals are going to suffer. People who are animal lovers and wildlife lovers know that extinction for a lot of animals is there. Unusual kind of animals and mutations may develop of bacteria and viruses that may change the way we have to think about health and managing health. So thinking about climate change itself is overwhelming. So climate change, after it happens, the effects, forget it. But even before it happens, just trying to imagine climate change is going to cause so much of a stress situation. It's like thinking about, maybe something that is, our minds are not capable of the scaling up of that kind of event. To imagine such a global tragedy is very, very hard for us. Now that we are actually, I would say this COVID crisis in a way is a good thing because it's teaching us how to think I mean, we have to, right now, as we're thinking of COVID, we have to think of America, Australia, every other place, perhaps except for New Zealand. Every other place is going through the same stuff. So it's a global level. So to think of global level, it's easy to think of Starbucks at the global level. It's easy to think of, a particular Kim Kardashian at the global level. Everybody is watching her, right? But to think of a tragedy, think of a monumental disaster at the global level is going to give you a lot of problem. And that is why the idea of climate change itself is a first thing. The moment you say climate change, first thing is denial. Oh, what does climate change have to do with me? I don't have to do anything about climate change. It's just happening somewhere. It's like, I'm happy in my house. Just leave it. Yeah, it's not important. It's not important. So the first reaction is denial. And this denial is not an ethical or a moral thing. It's a psychological coping strategy, because you just can't think of that level of tragedy. Nowadays, I just switch off the news. I don't want to see the COVID statistics. It's just the mind cannot grasp the enormity of the problem. And that way, our minds are only capable of a certain amount of data that they can process. So to process tragedy on such a global level is going to take a lot of training and a lot of understanding and a lot of thinking and a lot of cooperation with each other. So there's this professor called Gardiner who says that, who actually says that climate change involves harm. That is the problem. Climate change is not a happy-go-lucky thing that's going to happen to all of us. So, I was very foolish when I was young, when people were talking about climate change. They showed us these maps of A and B and the places in the world that will get a lot of rain and places that won't get rain. Then when I saw it, apparently in scenario A and scenario B, Bangalore and South India will get more rain. So it's like, wow, we're going to get rain. We won't have water problem. Because at that time, Bangalore was going through some water problems. So I decided very happily that so it was easy for me to convert that whole global warming into a sort of a good thing for me. And I cope with it, not think about it. So at that level, but we know now, if we read even a little bit about climate change, we know despite all the politicians and the people in the factories and the auto manufacturers and the petroleum lifestyle people denying climate change, it is still going to cause a lot of harm. Some places will become more habitable, many more places will face extremes of weather, sea levels will rise, flooding homes and destroying crops, right? So the problem is, the thinking is difficult because of one, I said, global change. The second thing is there is a problem with intergenerational thinking. That is because, let's say you're going there, right? It's very easy. There is suddenly some, you have your mother's favorite vase in the hall, and then you go there and suddenly you hear a crash and the vase has fallen, and next to it, your neighbor's boy is standing. Immediately, it's easy to say, oh, the neighbor's boy made that vase fall down. Then if you give that chanta to the neighbor's boy or shout at him or scold him or take money from his mother, your problem is solved. But in this case of global warming, whom will you catch? Who's that one person you will blame and take your revenge on? Or whom will you blame? We don't know what exactly started this whole trend of global warming. Can we start by saying, oh, the Industrial Revolution caused it? But then can we start by saying, no, like one of the really traditional professors that I met once said, if only women had decided to continue to wash clothes in the riverside, we won't have global warming, because all these washing machines and fridges and all these kitchen appliances are causing more problem with global warming. So it's a kind of anything can be blamed, but what actually caused global warming? You don't have a cause. So when something is causeless, right now, supposing somebody is having a cough and you don't know why they are coughing, then you have a sense of anxiety. So the anxiety is a causal anxiety. We don't know what caused it. Why are these people having this problem? Why are we having global warming? And so that anxiety, not only is it spatially dispersed, it's a global level problem, but it's also temporarily distributed. The problem is the causes across huge generations. Did the first guy who started fire start global warming or climate change? Or did the fellow who started manufacturing fridge and railways started? Or was the first motor car the cause for it? So there's nothing to pin it on. And that causes a sort of what when something you don't know what to do. It's like sometimes, you know, when the child is like coughing, you don't know what to do, what is causing its distress, and you run around, and that causes a kind of an anxiety. Because on one hand, if you are the kind of person who likes to help people, you don't know why the suffering is happening, and so you will not be able to mitigate the suffering. The third thing is a very philosophical problem, or you can say a problem for academics, because we have theoretical ineptitude. That means we do not have a way of understanding what is happening, because there is no way we can understand what's happening across the world. We have a Marxist theory to explain labor. We have some social theories to explain the way society behaves. We have some theories of capitalism to explain capitalism. But we have no theory that bridges science and humanities and social sciences together to understand the phenomenon of global warming or climate change. So we don't have theories about change, for instance. We don't have theories about how huge groups of society have handled change or climate. Because at the time these changes took place in earlier periods of human history, we didn't have record keepers. So we just know that, you know, we have no way of knowing why the Harappans died out, right? So there's no record, but we know they died out. So how did the Harappans handle their environmental disaster? We have no clue. All we have is archaeology. So that way, we don't have a theory or an understanding of a global, we don't have a scaled up theory, because all our theories are very tiny. They apply, like caste applies to India, or race applies to US, or we can look at the theory of environmental scientific theory of, you know, some kind of modeling and others, which will tell you data, which will tell you prediction. But there is nothing that actually deals with the whole scale problem. We don't have a huge theory. And I'm not saying we will not get it, but we don't usually work on that kind of theory. We work on tinier bits of, you know, like, you know, what was the problem of the migrant laborers during COVID. So that's the level to which we can work. We cannot work on what's the level of migration of all people and all things in a crisis. So I think one of the things we have to do is to look at this large scale theorization, which will make us a little more. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, these are all problems of being at home, and it's the internet problem. So current went and came. So I was in darkness for a couple of minutes. So power shut down and power came back on, luckily. Okay, so I was saying that even before we start thinking about the idea of, you know, like climate change, we already have got so much of mental problems just thinking about climate change. So now we have to think about we have to think about the idea of you know, as I said, the idea of where and how can we locate climate change. Can I find it in my neighborhood park, or is it in the car and the petrol usage that you do? Is it in public transport? So you can't, it's very difficult for us as human beings to actually point to one thing and say, this is why climate change is happening. So that causes a kind of a mental anxiety, even in the people who are activists like us, who are working towards environmental protection. On the other side, we'll also say that there is also this idea of, you know, the who did what kind of question, right? So that is also going to cause us anxiety. And we are also not good at long-term thinking. We are very bad at long-term thinking. There's usually avoidance. I know very few people who plan their future, because everybody, this whole thing of the modern world is take one day at a time. Take one day at a time, yes, but you should have a long-term plan. And if you don't have a plan, it causes a cognitive problem. And I'll tell you how. Because a lot of the pseudo pop psychology, as we call it, that's happening today, is probably because a lot of people are into this self-help, into positive thinking, into all those kind of thinking. And that is not a cushion for the future. That is actually a cushion for the present. You're so comfortable with yourself and pampering yourself at the current time that you do not realize that the future is going to be tougher. So we are not training for a tough future. We're training for a future that will be more comfortable than what we have now. And that in an overall sense is going to be more of a problem. So we're going to ask the question to ourselves like what are some of the effects of climate change. I'm not going to tell you about the climate change itself. I'm sure there are other scientists who will be talking about it. So climate change itself has many effects, like, I told you already, there'll be like melting of the ice caps, there'll be, so it's not only climate change, it's global warming combined with climate change, right? So that's the point. So one of the first things that happens in the effect of climate change is the strangeness. We will not be used to something like this before. Like today, I think the Prime Minister also said, "Aisa humne na suna tha na dekha tha," that kind of thing, right? You have not heard of such a thing before. And that is going to be a problem, because whenever you talk to somebody and they'll say, "Oh, it snowed in Delhi." And people are like, "It never snowed in Delhi in my life." So people's memories don't have an idea of what kind of climate we're going to face. So there's strangeness of it all. It never rains. May, it's very, very, very hot. It never rains in May. It rains in April during my final exam when I was in school. But after that, it never rained. So what is this thing called May rain? So that is something that's strange, and the strangeness is very gradual. Climate disasters, or what we call climatic events, if you want to use the correct word. Climatic events are very, very common in climate change. So these climatic events are huge, large scale events which will suddenly cause, let us say, the melting of the polar ice caps. Two of the islands in the South Pacific is actually going underwater. Okay, these people will have to. They're called the. I think they're called um, Tulavu and Carternet. I think this is the name of the two islands. They're actually, sea has started coming in, like bubbling from their land. So their land is going to go underwater, and they're planning to go down and settle in New Zealand, because the two islands themselves are going out of. So you were living on an island and suddenly imagine a day when British Isles is underwater. Like the entire United, it's an island after all, right? Imagine there's no UK. That's just a blue sea. It's a very, it's shocking to think of it like that, but it's quite possible, and we don't see it because it's very gradual. It's like this. It's just like the story of the frog, right? And the frog is inside the water, and you start boiling it slowly, and more and more comfortable with it. If you throw a frog in a direct water, it'll all like jump. It'll all like jump out of the pot because it immediately knows. So gradual change is something people don't perceive easily. They will, if you talk, and if you're talking to your grandfather and you listen to his stories, you will realize the change is gradual. You'll say, "Oh, during my time this was not there." In my time when I was a young kid, we used to drink water directly from the tap. It used to smell of chlorine, but most rivers was most open sources of water were clean enough to drink. We would even go to the park ponds and drink water. We didn't fall sick. But today, I can't even think of drinking from a public tap. Public tap also, I'll think 3 times whether I'll get a disease or not. So gradually, it has happened over the time when I went from drinking water from a tap, from a river, to now drinking only like bottled water, which I carry with me or I buy somewhere. So that gradual change we are not ready for. We don't perceive it. It just, we get used to it. And this used to getting change is a problem for cultures and for human beings alike. So we are going to live in a warm world, a melting world with weird climatic event. And our science, which we have always had for, our science, which we always had solutions for everything that we had, is failing us because there's no way science can predict. You can't challenge the government saying, "Stop global warming." You can't. "Stop climate change." You can't, because it's not under the control of any government. The most powerful man in this world with the largest amount of money and the most amount of military personnel can decide that global warming is not going to happen. Kind of idea that science also cannot save us causes us this problem of loss of home, which is sometimes we refer to as oikophilia. Oikophilia. We have a love towards our home, and our home is being threatened. We can even understand in terms of why the laborers want to go back home, because they have oikophilia. You feel safer at home. If you're in a strange place, wherever you travel, when you're not home, you come back and there's a kind of a stress relief. Like, yeah, this is familiar. Because I know in my house where I can fall and break my head. So I will avoid it. But in a strange place, I cannot. So our planet is our home. So when we start to see the planet itself, the home, supposing you go out of the house and you come back home and somebody has changed all the furniture in the house in the place where it was not, then you feel a sense of anxiety because your home has changed forever. And that causes a disorientation. It causes loss of belonging. You feel you're not. I keep on thinking every day in Bangalore that this is not the city I lived in. This is not the city I was born in. It's different. It's different. There's a lack of, people say, hey, you're nostalgic. Yeah, you and your old stories. Don't be like a grandma. But this is not the sense of that. This is not a sense of nostalgia. It's a sense of a loss, unfamiliarity, fear, and distrust. And as the climate changes, you will also start to have people react in strange ways, because people are stressed, and as people get stressed, there will be lots of competition for food, water, land. There will be migrants, there will be people who are not of your community, there will be others coming into your life. Others will tell you what to do. So the same Amazon fellow who used to come and give you a lot of goodies and you used to feel so happy about it, today when he comes to the door, you're like, I hope he doesn't have COVID. It's that whole anxiety. If such a small virus can cause such a small virus can cause us so much of anxiety, in distrust in human beings. We just are not ready to trust him. If he says, no, madam, still you're a little like this. It's not like you will go around bashing people up saying they have COVID, but the distrust will grow because you'll be vigilant, you'll be hyper alert. And as climate change happens, alertness or hyper vigilance will come into people slowly. It's like when women always are hyper vigilant already. Okay, because when we're walking on the road, we are always checking to see whether we're going to be under attack from some guy or something. So that is the sense. So if men are right now in the COVID crisis are looking around and thinking, oh, does he have COVID, does this person have COVID, and they're scared, remember, this is how women feel on the road all the time. In all public spaces, women are very aware all the time. It's hypervigilance. And one of the reasons why we are getting heart attacks early is because we are constantly in a state of flight or fly syndrome, right? We are in hyper vigilant, it is called. So continued hyper vigilance. What is going to happen when because you don't know whether to carry your umbrella out or not. You don't know what's going to happen. So with climate change, gradual changes in climate, and with the uncertainty of your weather, you start to see all these weather apps will start failing because you can't predict. It'll say it'll rain, it won't rain. So we're so geared to a predictable life now. We are so geared to a stability of life now in the modern times, the current times, that we can't be with uncertainty. And that is going to make us, when we see uncertainty, we become hyper vigilant. Probably one of the reasons why COVID is mentally affecting a lot of people and you're not able to sleep and you're having disturbed sleep patterns is because you're hyper vigilant. You're constantly looking to see what is going to happen next. It's like being in a suspense movie where you don't know who the murderer is forever, for 1 month, for 2 months, for 3 months, for more months. So it's a constant state of suspense. It's called hypervigilance. And that is a mental state that will disturb sleep, that will disturb a lot of health habits. It causes some kind of dissociation from the body. It also causes what we know as early symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So let me go about to the idea of the sudden climatic events, right? When sudden climatic events happen, um, we study in psychology. There is a particular subject known as ecopsychology, which studies the relationship between environment and people and how they are. In ecopsychology, we look at the minds of people. So far, ecopsychology was focusing on how nature is a place of healing and rest for the mind. So if you're mentally afflicted, you have mental illnesses, or you have certain kind of anxieties, going into nature will provide you a kind of a soothing experience, a kind of a joyous experience where your mind will be restored. You know, when you're really anxiety, you just take a walk in the park, you feel relieved, and then your tension comes down. So that is going to overturn. So far, the nature that was going to give you so much of peace and joy has become unpredictable. It's become extreme. So going out is dangerous because there are all these bacteria, and it's almost like living in a forest where the wilderness is taken over, right? So you'll go to that, if you think of going somewhere and there's an extreme event, it's quite possible that you may be, the temperatures outside may be too high for you to bear. You may be getting some kind of cancer from the sunlight, or there may be depletion of oxygen. We may be carrying little oxygen bottles with us. So there's so many things that could happen. Okay, extreme events, even smaller events, like just the temperature going up a little more every day. Like instead of being at 35 degrees, suddenly every place is at 49 degrees. So these are the kinds. So what we have is we understand something called ecokinetics. How does our body respond to changing climate and atmosphere? It is very easy for us to build a bubble, put an AC, put a fan, and stay inside that bubble. Okay. And now COVID has taught us we can't stay inside the bubble. We just, inside the bubble also we are suffering, because when you're locked down is like a lockup for us. We are not happy. So obvious we need the outside. So far people are thinking, okay, if we are going to be the atmosphere is all spoiled, we'll all build these big bubbles around the city, pump in extra oxygen, and have like this artificial environment for us to breathe in. We can adjust. Scientifically we will manage. But then we realize that without seeing the sky and the moon and the clouds and the birds, we cannot exist as human beings, because before we are technological beings, we are natural beings, we are ecological beings. And that ecology, that relationship with the earth and the nature, is what is the fundamental core of our principle, which Ananya sometimes calls as ecological self, right? So negative. So the idea is, it's called ecokinetics. That is the way ecology affects us. So there's a lot of research being done, okay? And in the research that's being done, they have said that climate change and climate change events are traumatic for individuals. If they're traumatic, there are two kinds of trauma. So we know how people deal with like traumas like earthquakes, floods, the tsunamis. These are all climatic events which are hugely tornadoes. My student must be on the thing. Dr. Kalpita and me worked on the Sundarbans, where we looked at how people deal with the idea of change itself. So the idea of change for people is, there's traumatic. There's like, it comes, it takes everything off and goes. A lot of hurricane studies, earthquake studies have shown that you have a lot of effects after trauma, which are similar to what we call PSTDC, that is post-traumatic stress disorder. It's got a long name, but let's assume that this is what happens. Exposure to trauma impacts ability to problem solve, and that causes a problem of processing information. And when you can't process information, your attentional capacity goes down. And then again what happens is subtle so the subtle effect of trauma, this is very interesting for us as environmental activists, particularly if you're involved in meditating climate change, or you're one of those environmental volunteers or mental health volunteers. You must remember that post trauma you will not be able to think properly. So you have had a trauma. So a lot of people sometimes, when they are experiencing trauma, they freeze. They're not able to get out of the traumatic situation. And some people say, he had a rope there. Why didn't he see the rope? Why didn't he climb out? When they experience trauma, the rope disappears from your view because you lose the ability to think. And that, I think, is the most dangerous effect of climate change, because as extreme climate events take place, we will lose the ability to problem solve. That which makes us human is the ability to problem solve, and we will lose our attention, we will lose our problem solving. A lot of people think that during this COVID crisis, everybody can sit and watch a lot of movies, can read a lot of books, but you're realizing that you are not able to think and be productive. This one of the reasons why you're not able to do it is that because of hypervigilance and the trauma of dealing through such a global event, your thinking shuts down, your cognitive abilities are reduced. So for example, they did some cognitive tests on people after earthquake. So actually they did some on tests on children and all, and children actually showed that after a trauma their performance level dropped by almost like 40%, I think. So these kind of researchers have shown us that post trauma your cognitive levels are really low. So it is like you have you cannot think about the trauma. There's so if you cannot think about the trauma, you cannot heal yourself, because you have to process it cognitively. You have to think about what happened to you, how sad it was, or what happened to your house, and this was an event. So you kind of block out the whole event. You just go, you can get amnesia, you can just block that whole trauma out. It can just disappear from your brain, right? Or you have to process it. You have to tell yourself a story about it. Unless you process it, but how do you process it? With your brain. And if your brain starts shutting down, the stress continues, and then your thinking decreases. You will zone out. You know, a lot of people have seen people who have had an accident. Sometimes when they reach the same spot where the accident happened, zone out, they just blank out. So it's actually the trauma taking over. Reduced cognitive ability and trauma, stress, and further reduced ability, and it goes on in a cycle, and there is no way to cut that cycle. So it is very, very difficult for us to ignore. What happens is, in case of climate change, we are looking at living conditions, we are looking at nutrition, we are looking at houses, we are looking at energy efficient buildings, we are looking at sustainability, but we are not looking at the minds of the human beings. We are not looking at mental health as important in climate change. We are not building minds. We are only building buildings, and we are building habits. We are building houses. We are replacing, let's say, we are doing all this eco-friendly, reuse, recycle, all that thing. Very good. But what are you doing for the minds of the people? How are the minds going to be smart? How are the minds of people going to be taken care of during climate change? So that is an important question we have to ask. So there is something that we also have to notice. There are two things. Because the scale of climate change is very high, we will have two levels of effects. The first level of effect will be the individual stress, which is very easy to look at it. Is it? There's a stress of adaptation, okay, which every individual, we have already experienced that in COVID. You know, it's a difference between want and need. So you'll always distinguish, this I want, this I needed. So ultimately you will have to decide. You can't distinguish between what you want and what you need, because you're already not processing. And then, like, I just got this ridiculous desire to eat mangoes on in the lockdown 2.0. I wanted mangoes. And then instead of understanding it as a want, I said, I need mangoes today. And then I paid money to some post office that didn't come, and I was like frustrated, irritated, all because I couldn't, because of so much tension and not going out, not exercising, not having enough space in the house, uh, all the death ideas coming, people starving, the government messing up, everything is causing so much stress for me that I couldn't distinguish that wanting mangoes is a want and not a need. Food is a need. Wanting mangoes is not a need, right? So between want and need, I lost the ability to distinguish. And luckily for me, I have books, I have ways of dealing with my own stress, I have meditation. So I did that, and I did therapy on myself, and then I got out of that. So it's understanding importantly what is your want and what is your need. And this causes stress, because it is not your fault. It is not that everybody bashed up that poor lady on television for wanting Starbucks. It is not her fault. It's a mental situation which makes her unable to decide between what she wants and what she needs. And it's a disease of the modern world. This mental affliction is a problem of the modern world, because we often get what we want so easily that we start needing it. So it's an important thing for us to also examine that this stress, I'm not saying it's wrong or bad, I'm not making an ethical judgment on those people, but I'm just saying maybe people need to be taught on the difference. You need to give them cognitive training to decide what is a want and what is a need. And like you teach the children, no, you teach the children, this is A, this is B, these letters, or between the difference between you know D and the O or something. You teach them how it's different. So we need to have cognitive training in actually teaching people how this is different. Then the second thing is the ethical stress. The ethical stress is another wonderful thing. My friend was talking about it, and we were saying that we got how woke is woke, right? Woke means to be aware of all these things. How woke should you be? That means every day I'm under a stress on whether if I'm one of those responsible people in the green movement who has decided to be eco-friendly. Every day when I use a notebook paper, I'm like, I used one more paper. One tree has died because of me. So this whole stress of ecological choices also causes mental stress. There's an ethical stress of eco-friendly lifestyle. If you're cognitive and you're aware and you're a proper citizen of India, you're continuously wondering. Even now, as I'm eating every day, I'm wondering whether should I feed somebody before I eat, because there are a lot of people starving. So there's a what you call a moral stress, and this moral stress, in as much it helps other people, but still it causes a cognitive stress. So on one hand, I can't distinguish between want and need. On the second hand, there's an ecological stress of ethical behavior. I'm stuck in a culture. See, the problem with this moral stress is when it is something to do with myself, right? I can change it, right? So from today onwards, I will not use chemicals in my house. I will take that decision. But when I am traveling and get an auto rickshaw that is spewing smoke outside, I have to go to my office. I feel guilty, and this guilt is not solvable because I have to go to my office and earn my living. But at the same time, I also know I'm already in a culture that is fossil fuel based. It is the environment around me. I'm already born into a non-eco-friendly environment. I'm born into a world that is already against the environment. So I cannot do anything with anybody else. I am not the Prime Minister of India, or I am not Trump. I don't have huge armies to command. I cannot, by snapping my fingers, I can't change the way people think. In fact, I can't even change my own brother or sister, right? So that is the cognitive stress that is caused by ethical choices. Because whatever you do, however much you do, ultimately it's not at the scale you would like it to be, right? And so that causes a lot of stress. So you see, the problem is not only about people experiencing climate change, it is also about people interacting with the environment in a way that will make a difference for the world. So I call this the activist stress, right? That's a nice word to use, the green activist stress. And then also the things that will get challenged is, what is my role in society? What is my responsibility? There's an individual survival, and there's a survival of the social. So how much of my own provisions will I be able to share with another person so he doesn't starve? How much of my salary can I give away in donation to something? Should I save the street dogs or should I save the elephants? So all these kind of choices that are going to come before us will cause stress. And the point is not to say that you're going to be, oh, there's a problem and I will give you these 10 things. And if you do that, you take a prescription of these 10 items that you can do, then all your problems, your stress will go. No, this is something we have to live with. Day in and day out, we have to face this because it's not going away. COVID is not going away soon, right? It's there. We have to live with it. Anytime we face a problem, what we do is we try to solve it so it goes away. We try to think, okay, if I do this will go away. It doesn't go away. Climate change will not go away. We have to adapt. You have to live with it. It is like your memory. It will never go away. It is with you. As human beings, it is with us to stay. So these are some of the ideas of individual stress. And then I'll come now to a very important idea of some of the ideas that happen at the social level, right? At the social level, we call it psychosocial stress. And psychosocial stress is the kind of decisions we take as a collective, as a society, as a government, as a residents association, as an apartment owner, all that. So most of the time when psychosocial stress happens, we only look at educated, upper class, privileged people as having the right to have mental health afflictions or problems. We think poor people people who are living below the poverty line, migrant laborers, housemaids, are people who are working in like Swiggy and Amazon and Zomato, all those courier boys, all the other people who are not in the privileged bracket of Instagram, Facebook, eating every day, college, school, university, all these privileged classes. We do not think of the psychosocial stress on the poorest. And every time climate change has caused disaster in the world, the poorest of the poor have had to pay a harder price because they are living on the edge. They are the first to be affected by climate change. And when they are affected by climate change, the first thing we think of is food, shelter, and clothing for them. We do not think of their mental health. If you're poor, you cannot have depression. If you're poor, you cannot have a PSTDs. If you're poor, you don't have feelings. You got food? No. If you got food, why are you complaining? So they can't have feeling that the food was bad, right? So this is the kind of idea that people get, that a certain kind of peripheral people, the subaltern people, people in the borders of society, in the edges of society, do not have, we demand sacrifice from them. And that is going to cause a lot of problem, because the mental problem of the privilege, like me, if I have a problem, there's a phone. I know at least I have like 3 therapists online. I can call them, I can pay them the fees, I can get myself sorted. But who's going to counsel my housemate? And that also is there. Now, if you notice, a lot of this migration is happening due to fear of COVID. There is nobody to actually um, uh, talk to. Where will that person go and talk to? Who will that person go and talk to? And are we even thinking of the mental health of those kind of people? Are we thinking of the mental health of people who are living on the edge? So climate change is going to bring about that kind of mental problems in them. And we, as aware citizens, have to be also aware that mental problems are not only for a privileged group, but they stretch across all human beings. And that is something that we have to be careful about. The second thing that also happens is we are seeing, it's good that we are doing it in the time of COVID, because we are seeing how we as global citizens respond to a stress. The second thing is the caregivers. You know what happens when a climatic event takes place, or this kind of a large scale event or a traumatic event takes place, or when the caregivers, let us say the people who are giving counseling, right? In the aftermath of Katrina, it was noticed that the mental health professionals in living in that area, who are supposed to give mental health assistance and traumatic assistance, themselves were victims of that trauma. Of course, they will take time. They'll be faster in getting out of their problems than other people, because they have the education and the expertise, but they themselves are affected. So when people are affected themselves, can we put the burden of the rest of the country and everybody on them? Right now, the doctor himself is ill. Then can we ask him to go and again help COVID people? There is more stress on the mental health providers than in a normal case. So climate change with increasing mental health, do we even have enough professionals to deal with it? That's a whole different question. Are people even considering mental health important enough to talk about? As I said, the reason they don't consider is they think depression is some kind of thing which happens to certain kind of people. It's like people used to think that heart attack happens only to men, or that diabetes used to happen to rich men who eat a lot of sweets. So these kind of rumors still float around, wrong information float around. So in that case, are we even equipped to deal with counseling for such a large population of people? Let's say everyone comes suddenly from tsunami, they are coming and they're suddenly staying in your house because their entire villages have gone underwater. Do we have enough people to talk to them about the trauma of it? Do we have enough health professionals? And if there are health professionals, are they also not undergoing the climatic stress? So the physical safety is usually governments and everyone in every disaster management document we produce. The safety of physical safety, physical nutrition, food, clothing, shelter is given priority, but mental health is totally ignored. And that's a sad thing in India, that first of all, mental health is only for mad people or something like that. There's this whole idea that it's about madness, it's about insanity. It's also very deep rooted prejudices against people who have mental affliction. Following all this, I haven't seen a single article today till date on how mental health institutions where people are like, we have put them in these asylums. How are they being managed? Are they getting their food? Are they being taken care of? We don't know about them. How are they dealing with this kind of, and people who are claustrophobic, how are they dealing with this? We don't know. So there is no conversation. There's conversation about, oh, I'm stressed out, I'm overwhelmed. All this pop psychology is coming, but actual studies on the mental health of people during this crisis um, is not being looked into. So I know I'm raising a lot of difficult, unsolvable problems for you, but that is the nature of the topic I'm talking about. It's very nice for me to say, oh, all of you do yoga 10 minutes in the morning and meditate and say, Kara, you'll all be fine. It is not. Because if you want that kind of thing, there are enough people telling you how to stand on your head and calm yourself down. But actually, climate change is not that simple. It is going to be a huge challenge for us. And it better informed we are about the level of the challenge, the better equipped we'll be to deal with it. We won't expect it to give pardon, right? It's not going to come and say, hi, I'm climate change, hope you're ready. It's going to come with a bash and then it will hit us on our face. And the whole of humanity will have to come together in a very strong show of strength to deal with it. So there are 2 or 3 things which are very important. So there needs to be a robust public health system with mental health included in the public health. Right now we have vaccination, we have pulse polio and all. Where is the mental health public system available to everyone? In Bangalore also, if I needed a public hospital, I have to go all the way to Nimans. Where are the local workers? If somebody is ill in, let's say, Dodbellapur, is there a mental health professional there to counsel someone? So in that sense, the public health system doesn't even bother about mental health. There'll be like this 4 or 5, mental asylum hospitals or whatever, mental hospitals or whatever. And people won't go there because only mad people are supposed to go there. So there's already a bad name for mental health institutions. But on top of it, what actually happens is there are no counselors available. There are no people available. What we have is trained professionals, but these trained professionals are not doctors of mental health. So let me come to the solving of the problem, because I think if you can't end a speech like this with a talk with a solving of the problem, there's a lot of anxiety. So I've caused you all a lot of stress. I apologize for that. But let's look at the 2 ways in which we solve this problem, or we get mentally ready for climate change. And I think it's important for all of you to kind of go out with this message and try and implement it as much as possible. The first is mitigation. That we are all doing. We are all experts in sustainability, having bamboo toothbrushes, reducing plastic, reducing dependence on fossil fluids, writing letters to the government, everything. We're doing all that. Mitigation is quite, a lot of organizations are working. We are bringing back the green. We are this one. We are also, but we are not measuring adaptive capacity. There are some populations which have an adaptive capacity, and there are some populations which don't. In this COVID, you'll find some people really performing okay in this time. Then some people are really, struck and they don't know what to do, they're frozen. So there's something called adaptive capacity, and that needs to be measured in individuals. And there are very good ways of measuring that adaptive capacity, okay? So we need clear predictive responses. So your disaster management is not like, okay, today we have this problem and we are going to sit in a meeting today and tell you what to do tomorrow. No, we have to have, because when disasters strike or climate change strikes as disaster, we will not know what to do, because at the time our brain will stop. So we need instructions. It is like, even if I don't know what to do, when the current goes, all I know is I will sit down quietly and light a candle. So I know where the candle is, the matchbox is. So I don't get totally flustered when the current goes. I also know current is going to go, so I have a matchbox and candle ready. So we will be preparedness for climate change. And if you look up the UN, the University of California, almost everywhere, if you just Google preparedness for climate change, there are a whole host of ideas for both governments, institutions, where people are being prepared for climate change. without denial. First, we should stop denying that there's going to be climate change. Second, we should be prepared. And our preparation is not at the individual level, it's at the social level. It's a level of society with our other participants. So every day we have, so I'll just be finishing in another 5 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions, and then I'll lead it on, okay? So the uncertainty, the most important problem of climate change will be the uncertainty. We just don't know what's going to happen. So if you ask me, should I buy rice and keep it for the next 5 years? I don't know. Or if you ask me, will mosquitoes increase? I don't know. So we don't know. And because of not knowing, we can end up in two places. When there's uncertainty, we just stop doing, because anything we do is not going to prepare us. So we just freeze and we don't do. We cannot decide. And then we lose faith in support systems. And when we lose faith in support systems, we can't trust. Now, once the demonetization has happened, no woman is saving up money in her dabba. Before and all, my mom and all used to put some money inside one, kitchen dabba and save. Now that whole 2,000 rupees or whatever, after demonetization, suddenly it lost, right? Some of the women lost that money because they had to go to the bank, and then my maid servant herself, the husband found out he had money, and then he snatched it from her, changed it to the new notes. She lost that money. From that day onwards, she's not putting that money in the dabba, because she doesn't know what if they change the notes again. So there's no trust in that money system anymore. There's no trust in banks. 2 or 3 banks collapse, and then everybody is like, do I need to buy gold, or do I need to keep things in the bank? So the trust is lost, the faith is lost. And when trust is lost, you're again hyper vigilant. You're like, there's this indecision. Things which you were taken for granted, you have to decide, should I, shouldn't I? And every day there's a pre-reflective conception of danger, of risk and uncertainty. So what happens is there's a reasonable doubt. Okay, if I go outside during COVID and hang out in a big hall with a lot of people, there's a reasonable doubt that I may be infected by a virus. But then if it is not, then there is uncertainty which causes a kind of I don't know to decide. I don't have enough facts to decide. And this causes what we call cognitive load. So this cognitive load just increases and increases with uncertainty, because more and more, your brain it's also like a computer box, right? If you run 5 programs on it, your computer will run. Supposing you run 20 heavy load program, your CPU cannot process everything. Your brain is like that CPU. So if you're making it decide some 25 things at the same time, it will just crash. And that is a mental problem. That is a problem for psychology to solve. So of all the things that I found, I have gone through so many books on climate change, ethics, how to deal with it, everything. Of all the books, I found one guy, he's a very controversial guy, and his name is Bengaluru. Okay, people don't like him because he said something very straight. And when people speak the truth, it's very difficult for people to take that truth. He calls it a deep adaptation program. He says, don't fool yourself into thinking that everything will be fine. Give yourself the bad news that climate change is here. So he calls it the 3 R's that we have to teach our children. First, he says we have to train ourselves to relinquish. That means we have to relinquish things, we have to relinquish attitude, and we have to give up a lot. Maybe this whole movement of minimalism that is coming, it's good for climate change. Because if you have to run from your house, you'll have only one suitcase to carry, right? You don't have to carry so many things around you. So relinquish, give up things, give up attitudes and wants which are not necessary for the climate, we have to survive as a race. We have to survive as a human race. We can't just survive for ourselves in our own world. Sooner or later that COVID is going to come and hit you. You also have to be in lockdown. The next is restoration. Okay. And then the third is resilience. Resilience is building up a stoic attitude. If you talk to your grandparents or thing, they'll keep saying, what, you're crying about this thing? In our time, there was no current at all for 25 days. So now we think, oh, you don't know how difficult it is. I can't do classes, blah, blah, blah. Internet is my life, all that. But actually, if you build up resilience to survive as human beings, build alternative models of living where you're not dependent so much. Your inner strength is built up. You are more adaptable. You're not missing. If you miss coffee, you're going to like, I'm going to die, Meera, because I didn't get coffee today, or I was going to die because I was not going to get mango. That is not dying. It's just something you didn't get. That's all. So, like children throwing tantrums, we throw tantrums to the modern world. Car, bus, travel, everything is a tantrum for us. So, perhaps we need to become adults in our relationship to nature and look at whether we can build up the strength and the resilience within us. And at the same time, we need to build up communities which are resilient. We need to go and talk to those people living on the edge and build up their resilience so that they are capable of facing the climate change as much as we are. So that brings us to the idea of restoration. Restoration is not about building better homes, building architectures of climate change, creating windows which are solar panels. All that is all like very tokenistic ways of building resilience. Resilience is in human community. Resilience is in relationships. Dr. Sarukai and Guru have written a book on everyday social, and they talk about this resilience in the terms of Maitri. And Bendel Jim also talks about it. He says, as long as we are culturally bound together as a community, we'll come through. The entire people should hold each other's hands, and then the flood will not push you away. If you're a single person trying to reach the shore, it will push you away. So this kind of resilience building is about building communities and strength. If you know who your watchman is, he won't starve. Or if you know who the person who's teaching your children is, she won't starve. So this whole community building, a building of friendships with people, a building of cultural resonances, a building of like-minded people will actually get us through much more difficulties. In the olden days, religious institutions like the churches and the temples functioned as places where to join people. Now that those institutions are gone, we have to create new institutions. We have to create new forms of belongingness to people, which will bring people together and support each other without judgment, without ethical problems, without alienating people. And so these are some of the ways in which Bendel Jim says relinquish, resilient, and restoration of communities. Yeah. So these are, so given that whole ideas, these are some of the ideas I shared quickly. I'm not going to, there's much more you can read up about this, but we can start with the question. So Akhilesh, go.
Yeah. I think we have a few number of questions. If anybody have more questions, you can shoot it up right now. We'll be dealing with 5 to 6 questions because of the time constraint. And I'll be providing a link in the chat box. So if you have more questions, you can shout it down on the link. So first question that I would like to ask is about this attitude towards climate activists. Like as and personally, I have received a lot of people sharing this topic with me that they are doing something like activism and things like that. But the peer consider it as something, backwards. It's not like something cool that they're doing or something that the peer puts a pressure that, why should you be doing something like this? You're not like as cool as us or something. There is this inequality or gap that is developing in between it. What would you suggest for like both sides, like the person who is saying these comments, who is some people have told me they're facing cyberbullying due to putting up stories or status or providing posts that's regarding saving the environment and things like that, and then to the person who is being affected by it. So what would you suggest for those people?
So I would suggest that at some level, what we also do as activists is that we maybe our tone is a little more accusatory. So when people hear our posts, they're not hearing it as information or sharing or concern as co-concern. They're seeing us as judges who are judging them. So a lot of times I have noticed that when I put up, I'm also in a very difficult position on Facebook because I'm a gender activist, and each time I post something, I get all this horrible trolling and people come and say all kinds of comments. But the point is, I found my forum where I can share these. Like you are there, you're calling me, right? These 30, 40 people, whoever are on this particular call are listening to me, right? So the point is not to make sure that, so we go on banging our head against these people who will not listen and we forget the people who are listening. And I think as activists, it doesn't matter if they don't listen. If we prepare ourselves, so the mitigation is going to be very um, mitigation is going to be very difficult, right? Mitigation is not in our control because it's just governance, it's the capitalists, it's a larger concern. But education is. And so perhaps showing a movie like, what is that, The Journey of the Arana, there's one movie in Kerala about this, or there's a movie about, let us say, a nice movie about the environment and coal, showing a documentary, showing animals, or talking to children, because they are the ones who are going to be, if you try and convince that old IAS officer 100 times, he's not going to listen because he's already past that age. He's not going to deal with the climate change. Children are going to, and children will listen and respond. I think so, therefore you can have a kind of a reaction to that. So as activists, I think we also need to support each other, because within activism there's so much of infighting. Everybody wants to be the best activist of that particular voice, and there's so much of, I would just call it Kupa Mandukatva, that is that frog in the well phenomenon, right? You're so busy saving elephants that you are against the people who are saying save stray dogs. You're so much into vegan that if an activist is drinking milk, you're like, I'm vegan, and you're an activist and you're drinking milk, you're a cow murderer. That kind of, if activists are going to fight with each other, where can we expect people who are not activists? I think that is where I think the hand of friendship should be accommodative. It should be accommodative for a common cause. And I think that is important. And once we do that, when we all support it, I think people will sway. And it takes a long time. After all, Gandhiji took so many years to get freedom.
Yeah, because like people feel this guiltiness. What I believe about sustainability is like you have this certain limit as an individual. Like you have this certain cap as an individual to which extent you can do sustainable actions. Or if you like milk, or if you like to have an egg or something like that, and you're not able to do it, you're like, some people are saying you're an activist and you cannot do it. It's, for them it might be something, like something they're very interested in, or something that they like it a lot. I believe sustainability
So target your audience. So what I will do is, for those of who want the books and the references that I done, I'll make a reference and I'll mail it to you. So perhaps you can just post it on your website, and then people can look at all the books.
Yeah, I think I can share another link right now. So, if people have questions regarding the webinar and doubts or something, or you would like to connect with Meera or something.
Yeah, I can definitely help you.
Yeah, I'll just share the in the chat right now, so everyone can have a look at the form. Oh, sorry. Yep, I have shared it in the group.
Okay. Any more questions? Yeah.
Yep. So there is just one question from Siddharth, and he's asking, can you elaborate the role of hope psychologically? Is it helping or is it hindrance?
Yeah. So when you say hope, you have to qualify it. Okay. The thing is, hope is always built on something. You just don't generally hope. When you generally hope, it's like this positive thinking. The positive thinking is a danger, because positive thinking in case of climate change will not happen. If you have a hope that climate change will not happen, or COVID will just, one day God will come and he'll say, COVID chale jao, and COVID will just go. Okay. This is a kind of a blind faith. It's a superstition, right? So hope as superstition is such a problem. So hope as a way which is dependent on you. You can hope that you will be able to become and train and be resilient to climate change. The hope is for the human race, and that is a positive thing. Because then, if you don't have that hope, you will go into inaction. Whatever I do, climate change is never going to change. And you just sit back and you don't do anything, right? You just give up. So if you want to avoid giving up, you have to have hope that, yes, we human beings together can tackle this. Even if climate change happens, we will survive climate change. We will bring back the green. Your own slogan says it. Mm-hmm. So the hope is good. But the hope that it will go away, or some government or somebody, I remember somebody shouting on the road that day, it's like, This government has to get rid of COVID for us. I mean, what can they do? Yeah, it's a virus. Where will they, I mean, what can, you can't do anything to get rid of the virus. It's a biological, it's hitting us, it's biological. There is no way the government must get rid of the mosquito. I mean, I agree that mosquito may be caused due to social problems and ditches and all, but it's not the government's job to get rid of the mosquitoes. The government job is to make you strong enough so you don't get bitten by the mosquitoes. You see? So hope directed towards the human race is good. Hope directed on some God saving us is bad.
Okay, so
Yes.
another question is by Naji, I guess. So Kerala is suffering from floods in the last 2 consecutive years, and so what kind of mental support we want to give the affected people during our social work, and what kind of activities help them to improve their mental preparation to stay against the environmental disaster.
So we don't have very smart, educated citizens, okay? So when you're doing mental health in the field, because the kind of people who are affected by floods are not those who are rich, because those Madis that don't have second floor only will have drought, right? The people affected by floods will be the ones who are staying in the huts, who are staying in the low-lying areas, cherries, people who are agricultural farmers, they are the ones who are affected. For them, we have a very ancient system of healing mental health, which is called narrative healing. They tell stories. You know, the stories like the Tayyam stories are there. If you had Tayyam, or you had these traditional folk literature to actually propagate the message of mental health along with physical health. So they've undergone a trauma. So somebody just sitting next to them and listening to them tell their stories and telling back the story. So if this is a very useful thing. So you've gone to village A and you've heard the story of, you hear a story of something gone wrong with that fellow. He lost his whole house, right? He had so much suffering. He lost his whole family. So he had to go to Trivandrum to work. So that fellow tells you his story. Then when you go to the next village, share the story of the person who went to Trivandrum, and other people will share their story. You know that talking helps, right? So when they are hit by trauma, they can't even express their sorrows. And stories help to express the sorrows. So that is why people will relate back to Mahabharata, to Ramayana, to Bali's story, to all these stories, because stories help them articulate their feelings. Stories help them tell the feelings. When I was doing counseling for a lot of women, they were so traumatized in their life that they were not able to tell you about the stories, but they will tell the story like, in that serial Tulsi was feeling like that I'm feeling. Okay, because they cannot express, we don't have the words to express. You know how Tabu felt in that film, that is how I am also feeling. So you need to give them stories to tell their stories. And I think if you teach the people to tell their mental health through stories, you will find a way of reaching and giving therapy to them. So that is why in the olden days, the religion used to play a lot of role. So when you come, so if you do not want religion, then you have to take folk literature, because folk stories help, right? So you can tell about the Arani story, or you can tell about the story of a Tayyam god. You can tell the story of the hero of a local village. So these stories are the suffering of a woman. So all these stories will help them articulate their mental suffering. So the best thing is not to go and say, oh, I'm going to give you cognitive. What are you feeling? What are you feeling? Nobody knows to say what they're feeling. Even I can't say what I'm feeling because I don't have the vocabulary. Right now I'm feeling happy, sad, anxious, everything at the same time. And these three words are not enough to. So it's like, tell what you're feeling. Tell. So that's not the way to do it. So give them stories, give them words through which they'll tell you the story. And then they will build up that story and they will become support. Sometimes it's enough for them not to do anything. Sometimes it's enough for you to hold the hand and listen. I think most of the time when we're doing good, we are so busy telling people what to do that we don't listen. And if you are able to provide that listening in all sense, because sometimes you're from a privileged background, you go and sit with a poor person, he will not tell you anything, right? You have to be, should not be you should be at their level. You should go and be them, and then they will talk to you. right? It's a training. It's something you have to learn over experience. It
Yeah.
won't come very easily, but when it comes, it's very good. Yeah.
So we'll deal with just two more questions. So one is from Fatima Zeba, and she's saying, as a mental health professional from Kerala, she would like to mention that we have a very robust psychological response system, especially in Kerala for response to disasters, and that has come in handy to putting up a swift response to COVID. Even now, mental health programs are up and running, but do we need to do more to create awareness about the existence of these support systems?
I think so. And I think that is one of the main things that you have to do is to tell that mental health is not about madness, because still a lot of people believe either they are superstitious about mental health or they dismiss it in certain sections of society, right? If it is a particular kind of, if particularly women and children, right? When women are supposed to suffer, so if a woman is feeling bejar, they will say, hey, it's a normal thing for women, you're having PMS. And they'll dismiss her depression, they'll dismiss her pain. So you'll see a lot of women who have UTI won't go to the doctor, they will suffer particularly uterus prolapse. If you have noticed, people won't even go and say. So sexuality, sexually transmitted diseases, these are all things that will affect and increase the stress, right? And so what happens is the women will not come forward to share these things. Like right now, the amount of household violence would have gone up heavily all over the country. But women will not come out and say that because they can't even go out and say. And there's no place in their balcony where they can take a phone and talk to me. So these are, so awareness, creating awareness that there is a support system. If they walk out of the house and talk to somebody, there is a place which will receive them without accusing them of being bad women. Nalla stri Allah, they'll say. This is not a good woman. She left her husband. So that kind of, those kind of social, that's why we're saying we look, not only looking at mental health, but you're looking at psychosocial health. And when you, and so the program has to also move from the individual to society itself. Socially, we have to become aware of mental health. And I think as far as the robust program is concerned, it does address individuals, but it doesn't address psychosocial health. And I think that's where we need to move into the social psychology and the psychosocial psychology, where there's a larger, and first of all about nature. So if you get a flood, idella God given flood, and then if you feel bad about the flood, you can't say anything. So encouraging them to talk about natural disasters and saying that it's not only the human disaster. See, we always, if the house is gone, we say something. For the farmer who has lost his field, we don't say anything. We say, oh, it'll grow back next year. He will also undergo stress, no? So we have this whole bias against things. Things are more important. So when things are lost, there are more. When lives are lost, it's more important. When lives are not lost and they're undergoing continuous trauma, non-stop trauma, we don't look at them. I think that is where psychosocial psychology has to be introduced, like social psychology has to be introduced. Communities have to be sustained, not just individuals. Yeah. And I know the program in Kerala is very good. I really appreciate the way it is being done. Yeah, I hope other states will learn.
Yeah, Kerala's response like had this certain angle of mental preparedness for the people as well. So I think that's one reason why it was so effective. So one last question is from Lama, and it says like, it's a general question. So it's like, what are the ways we can solve global warming in a global level? So it's a very general question. And but I would like to add a certain thing, like, what do you think in the global level to change global warming or climate change, the mental preparedness, everything? What do you think is the role of education in it? What do you, from grassroots level onwards?
I think what we do wrong is that our education is devoid of nature.
Very true.
We should centrally be teaching people how to live, and we should teach subjects as co-curricular activity. But what we do is we teach subjects and we teach nature as co-curricular activity.
Yeah, I think just one thing to point out in between that is schools.
So it's a complete.
Yeah.
So I am so shocked at people who do not know to wash clothes or cook their basic, make their basic roti. Basic survival things people do not know, right? And so what happens in climate change is these become important. The survival skills become more important. The resilience and the stoicism becomes more important. The ability to sit in candlelight for 24 hours without power becomes more important than whether you know which country Niagara Falls is in. Okay, so a surfeit of information based knowledge education system, there are experts, believe me, there are experts. Realize I'm a philosopher, I study so many books, but that is not the centrality of education. The centrality of education is to teach people how to think and to learn. And once you teach that, then the person can actually grow and learn what he wants, how he wants. But right now value is placed on productivity, like how many hours, how much money you can make. So we are not valuing wisdom, we are valuing, I don't know, some kind of vocational wisdom, right? Or some kind of money producing wisdom. So
Yeah,
my wisdom of how to solve climate change is less valuable than somebody who would have told you now where to invest in the market and make the most money during COVID. You
yeah,
know, so so the whole education system itself slowly has moved. And so I find it very hard to teach my young students, younger people, because they're like, I don't care. We haven't taught them that it's okay that you eat your chocolate and don't give it to your neighbor. So in some sense, an erosion of values has taken place. And I think we can look to the ideas of Gandhi and other people, Krishnamurti, who actually introduced nature education. There are a lot of people, Pune school is one. There are a lot of schools in many places which are trying this other way of education. And those students have not like gone and become like, sannyasis in a jungle. They're doing quite well in industry and all.
yeah. I
But the
think,
point is their whole attitude is nature first,
yeah,
right? The attitude is that I'm not alone, right?
schools teach that about like there is certain chapters in science that will teach about climate change, the carbon cycle, the emissions, pollutions, and everything. But the basic thing is that school itself is not sustainable in any way. That school
Yeah,
is teaching about pollution and everything. They don't have an optimized transport system. It might be, they might be still running, ages old vehicles which are below pollution standards. The waste segregation doesn't exist. They are burning the plastic in their own campus, and things like that are happening. So I don't think the
yeah,
schools or colleges are setting that example of, the
yeah.
urgency of the
So they're
situation.
basically information. They're basically giving you a product. They're factories. You had this old beat. I think some song was that we don't need no education. The video shows everybody is going into this factory and coming out in the same way. There's no diversity. So they kill culture, they kill diversity, they kill art, they kill humanities. Now I actually, I got told by a person that science is only important. What are you doing? Philosophy is not at all important. My own brother said, you and your philosophy can take a walk. Science will save the world.
Yeah.
But when the person is hungry, it's not science that's going to save the world. It's a philosopher with the ethics who's going to go and give free food to the thing. So this idea that we can exist in an island by ourselves as human race without taking the animals with us, or as individuals, like we are Hindus and will survive, we're Muslims and will survive, or we are all philosophers and will survive. So this whole idea of isolating ourselves, alienating ourselves from other people, thinking we'll survive, is wrong. We will not be able to survive unless we join hands, unless we form a sangha, unless we are together. We did not win our freedom struggle based on one person. Sorry. Gandhiji did not give us our freedom. We won it because every unnamed soldier went and killed themselves in some fighting the British, or went and fought in the Satyagraha. Every officer said, I will not work for the British. So the mass has to be there, and the mass is not there in climate change right now. Because I told you, because it's a big thing to think about, and they're all like, today if I get my food, it's more than enough. Tomorrow I don't care. So future thinking has to be taught to the students. They're
Yeah,
not even taught to plan syllabus, right? So how do they tell this?
they are
Planning is not there.
diverse in some way. Like, people in science believe that, oh, arts is you, and like other subjects are like they just go in the specific one of way, and they're not fluid in any sort of way. And I think that that kind of, ends up being a very big disaster, because you're not capable of other subjects. You're just targeted on only one thing. And I think that's also important in the case of climate change. It's not just The people who are fighting for climate change is not just activists who doesn't have any other job. So, so I think this basic
Yeah,
mindset also has to change.
yeah,
So,
adaptation. And
yeah.
it's like join up or you won't survive. It's like that.
So I think we can wrap it up for
I
today.
think the COVID is a good thing. By the way, people who are climate change activists, I want to tell you, COVID is a good thing. It's training people to be resilient. It's training people in disaster management. It's teaching people how to be in a crisis. And the challenge is it's like a trial run. If we survive this, if we learn the way lessons that COVID is teaching us, our environment is actually restoring itself back a little, right? So this COVID is like some kind of a lesson that if we learn the lessons from COVID, we'll be much more prepared. In fact, most of India did not learn from the tsunami. I mean, Tamil Nadu, though it dealt with tsunami, it doesn't have a disaster in place for Chennai. It's one of the worst affected states, right? So we have to understand this. Somebody asked about social distancing and global warming. I don't think we should call it social distancing. First of all, as a psychologist, I'll object. It's not social distancing. I'm actually socially interacting with all of you, right? So the point is, the idea is to call it physical distancing. And physical distancing will not be such a problem unless we are all locked up in a house. In fact, it's going to grow less because with the less amount of land, people will be crowded, at least in third world countries or developing countries, they're going to be crowded so much. So our problem is how to have enough space and food for everyone. That's going to be our problem.
Yep. I think the question was psychological distance to climate change by Saumya.
That is there. That's what I said. Denial.
Yes.
Denial. Yeah. So resilience requires you to say, yes, climate change is happening, and then dealing with it. The Stoics are a very good example. We have to become Spartans. We have to become soldiers. We have to be warriors of climate change. We cannot sit back and say, oh, koi na koi usko solve kar dega. Nahi karega. There is nobody who is going to save us. No Kalki Avatar, no Jesus is coming back. Nothing is going to happen. We have to take our own decisions and live. Okay?
Yep.
Right.
So we'll wrap up the session. It was a pretty long one, but very interesting. So thank you, Dr. Meera ma'am, and thanks for like around 50 people who joined. Thanks a lot for joining. I hope you found something interesting. So there were a few links that I put up. So if you have more questions or want to get in touch with us or things like that, do check out those links in the group chat. If you want, I'll just pop them right now once more. So with that, we'll wind up the session. So thank you all.
As you said, no, it's a very layperson session. So there's a costly paper which will come out of this sometime. It'll get published. But this is like not academic. It's basically to engage with people and just bring the conversation. So I suggest all of you become ambassadors and go and talk about these things. Look through these ideas. And each one of you should talk about this. It's not something we should shy away from.
Yeah, this is a very important topic.
It's an important topic. I'm glad you did.
Yeah, like we talk about climate change in general, what are the causes and things like that. But in today's world, we are kind of understanding the importance of the psychological self, our mental health, and it's gaining more prevalence. So climate change is something that is happening very rapidly around us and something that has to be addressed. So linking these two factors was much important. And thank you. You could help us with it and like talk about it in the most best way possible. So thanks everyone. Hope you have a very good day and hope you deal with the scenario in a better position mentally. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
I think Siddharth, the session is recorded. I don't know where it will be put.
Yes, the session will be recorded. So if you want, I'll just put up our YouTube channel link as well. Just a second. We have a YouTube channel called Bring Back Green, in which we put up all the sessions, recorded videos, and there are more videos regarding climate change, education, and we deal with certain topics like, what are the importance between gender and climate change, what is the need for sustainable menstruation and things like that. So if you want to know more information on that, do check out the channel. I'll just share the link right now here.
Thank you all. It was a long session, but I really enjoyed myself.
Yeah, it was really.
Thank you so much for being with me.
So thanks a lot. Let's wind it up. Thank you. Have a good day,
Yeah,
everyone. Bye.
yeah. Bye.